Well, my name is Eric O'Connell. I am a pastor over at Hillside Community Church, and I'm currently getting my Doctor of Ministry at Gordon Conwell, and my thesis is specifically titled Trauma as an Agent for Spiritual Formation and Growth. Now, obviously Streams is a Christian organization, but these 4 weeks is a lot more, it's a lot more, it's very non-Christian friendly as well. This is something that affects everyone. And so for me, it's my passion to try and get the church to be more trauma aware as they engage the suffering of other people, because I think that's what we're genuinely called to do. But yeah, this is really just a conversation on what is trauma and how does it affect me. And part of why I think this is so helpful, especially for the Streams community, is the people that continue to come, is this is piggybacking right off of the parenting classes. And I'll tell you what right now, what I've always said as I've been genuinely walking with and engaging the suffering of other people. One thing that I've said to my wife that's been true is, if you want to cut straight to the heart of the suffering in someone else's life, like where is it rooted? One question: tell me about your mom and your dad. What was your relationship with with them? Tell me the good and the bad. So much of our current suffering and pain in adulthood is so intimately tied to that period of life. And so yeah, this being in conjunction with parenting classes is truly just something for me that is a huge blessing. So as we get started, this is going to be and I'll repeat these for new people that come, but the 5 sort of foundational truths I'm operating out of, right? So you'll see these come up throughout the entire 4 weeks. The first one is that you are a spire person. Right? And what I mean by that, so it's important to know the terminology. You are a spiritual, you are a physical, you are an intellectual, you are a relational, and you are an emotional person. If one of those things is out of whack, well-being is pretty hard to attain. Happiness, peace, contentment. Okay, so there's multiple facets of who you are, and if we're not doing well in one area, the other areas get affected. Bad news is that pain and suffering is unavoidable, and it will take a toll. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. This is just one of those basic human realities. Pain and suffering is going to happen. But the good news is that trauma truly is a script. It's a script that is very easily read, and I use the word control very intentionally, because once we understand the script that it actually is, we know how to actually anticipate when things are coming, and we also know what the proven intervention methods are. But pain can also be repurposed as a gift, right? That's kind of what the whole tagline for this entire class is transforming our pain into a gift and our grief into growth. And with that too, it's the trauma in your life has the potential to be your greatest source of growth. So these are the 5 foundational sort of truths I'm working from. And I'm gonna have, at any point, if anyone has questions, thoughts, feel free to stop me. But yeah, this is what we're working with. And so I wanna start this way. I wanna tell you about Johnny, okay? You may know Johnny, maybe you are like Johnny in your life, but I want to tell you about Johnny and why he acts a certain way and what he's like today, okay? So spiritually, Johnny likes the idea of a relationship with God. In fact, the church is something that, it's not a bad thing, but commonly uses the tagline, spiritual, not religious. Right? Throughout his life, he's been on that spectrum, but he's always been a passionately spiritual person. And when Johnny has been religious, he does dive head first into faith communities, but commitment over the long haul doesn't ever seem to stick. And whether it's they've made enemies somewhere, whether Johnny's made an enemy or he just needs something new, kind of how he acts from the spiritual side. Physically, Johnny's always sick with something. He's not dying, but he's just never been totally healthy. In fact, if there's a 2-month period where Johnny's not sick, something's wrong in the universe. It could be something like a common cold, but also in his family there's a history of cancer, of heart disease, all of those things, right? And so he's actually gotten his blood tested before, and there's some early indicators for what could be happening later on in life. Intellectually, he is a very smart, creative, and capable human, and that's actually the problem, is he doesn't take his own advice. He's too smart for his own good, and Johnny's heard that said of him and to him multiple times, but he just can't see, he seems to be his own worst problem, even though he seems to be a very creative and intellectual, capable person. Relationally, you just never know where you stand with him. He could be your best friend for 2 to 3 years, and then ghost you for 6 months. And then, out of nowhere, just become your enemy. And you don't necessarily know why that's happening. Worse, sometimes he has a reputation for this from a lot of people. He can be the life of the party or a total downer. You don't know what you're getting with him. And then lastly, emotionally, very hot or cold, right? There's no lukewarm. He either wears his fiery emotions on his sleeves at 24/7 unapologetically, or bottles it all inside until it eventually explodes. No doubt he's an emotional person and it's there. It's just there's never really been this ability to regulate or manage emotions well. Who here knows a Johnny? Okay. Yeah, I've known plenty of Johnnies in my life. This is why I say trauma's a script. Johnny can be the most annoying person in the world to love. A difficult, confusing person to love. But again, trauma's a script, and what I think is beyond a shadow of a doubt is Johnny is the way he is now because of what happened to Johnny when he was 0 to 18. So I want to take a second to give you some hypotheticals. There's a very strong likelihood that between the age of 0 to 18 spiritually, Johnny wanted a relationship with God. In fact, church was something that he'd always been told was good, but church and home life just never seemed to harmonize. Right? It was impossible to take everything that had been going on at home and fit it neatly within this church parameter. And when he got invited to youth group, the people meant well, but to call God a father was very difficult for Johnny because of his own relationship with God. They didn't know how much damage was being done in communicating it that way. Johnny's a weird kid, and he's always himself. And so just by being himself, he was told, you got to change your behavior or we're going to kick you out. So he just never really felt loved, accepted at all. And as he got older, he heard about all the abuse that takes place in the church, so he starts to believe, maybe I got lucky. Physically, largely neglected. Parents are divorced. Mom and dad worked multiple jobs. Johnny was a latchkey kid, often to fend for himself. Johnny's definition of clean is most people's definition of dirty, because cleanliness and hygiene was never a huge priority in the house growing up. And when serious health concerns arose, Johnny's family didn't have money, time. They just didn't really care or believe Johnny when something was going on. And so there were serious health conditions throughout his childhood that actually caused some damage later on in his life. But diet was horrible, sleep is inconsistent, not to mention the fact that Johnny knows all the CPS caseworkers on a first name basis because of the physical violence that takes place in his home with him, his sisters, and his mom. Intellectually, there was just a lot to process. Things like domestic violence, addiction, poor adult mental health, divorce and separation. And he was experiencing these things at times in your life when you're supposed to be learning the periodic table and your times tables, right? But it's how does a kid process through those things? A kid's brain, on average, is working at 250% more brain activity than the adult. And so think about all of the stuff that comes in a kid's mind where they don't know how to even use terms for this. And so with all that said, without a reliable guide, without someone to walk him through some of these things and help explain it, you just turn to whatever information was there. Constant truth seeker, constant information seeker, and whatever is going to help him make sense of this chaotic world, that's what he's going to try and search. Relationally, Johnny's dad abandoned him before he was born, and the dad who married his mom became abusive to the entire family because he was an abusive alcoholic. He had been abused himself. In fact, one time, Johnny's dad created a game on a 2-hour drive to the beach for a family day, and the game was, hey, you should grab a beer out of the cooler for me at the back of the seat, but the game is don't let any of the other cars see it, because if you let the other cars see it, then you lose the game. Well, Johnny didn't have much interest in playing this game, but when he learned about what the consequences were for not playing it, he certainly changed his tune pretty quickly because he got beat when he got home for not playing the game well, and his sister got beat as a result of his actions. The safest people in Johnny's life who promised to love and care for him were the people who caused him the most pain without acknowledgement or apology. So at a very early age, you just learn to say, okay, who can I trust? And the answer is nobody. All right, and then emotionally, if we consider all of this, his brain and his ability to emotionally regulate is just so not even a possibility, right? Brain's a mess, and so he acts out all the time, and there's consequences for that acting out, an inability to actually be understood, heard, and so the emotional processing and regulation just gets worse and worse. Johnny might be a very difficult person, okay? But Johnny's also a member of the 4+ Aces Club, and I'll tell you exactly what I mean by that in just a little bit. But he is a member of the 4+ Aces Club, and Johnny's behavior is more understandable when we actually understand the toxic stress resulting in trauma that was constantly surrounding Johnny's childhood. Johnny's a difficult person, but I love Johnny because this is my story. I'm a member of the 4 Aces Club, and about 3 years ago, that's what I looked like. I was 320 pounds, fatty liver, I was pre-diabetic, high cholesterol, all sorts of things wrong with me, severely depressed, things were not going well in my life. And that was right before COVID, and kind of this is me during the summer, looking like a goober on my church stage, but can even just see the difference of just life, and that comes, and that's why this is such an important topic to me, because I genuinely do believe that trauma doesn't have to control or destroy our lives. Genuinely, truthfully believe that with all my heart, otherwise I wouldn't be in front of you tonight. Additionally, I think it can also be your greatest source of personal growth if you allow it. And I think that's the hardest part, is most people don't ever want to allow it. And so I'm a child of trauma. It raised me well. It was the only friend that I had that never left my side growing up. And I want to tell you, just with joy and expectancy, I believe these two things because they've been realities in my life. So in order to approach trauma well, in order to confront it properly, because that's what we need to do if we want to grow from it, we got to know what we're dealing with. Got to know what we're dealing with, and that's really what this entire first session is about, is getting us aware of what is trauma and how does it affect us. As a pastor, the working definition I'm operating out of is that trauma is the suffering effects felt and or caused by sin. All right, but there's a lot of different definitions, and this is at a base level, it's what it is, but I want to show you the process. Okay, so trauma happens when pain and suffering occurs in our life. That's the first step. That pain and suffering then causes toxic stress, as opposed to positive or neutral stress. For instance, right before I came here, I went in my cold plunge for 3 minutes before I got here. All the way up to my neck, submerged in 49-degree water. That is positive stress on my life because it's something I don't want to do, but it actually very specifically grows me in the moment. Neutral stress is, it's been a busy week for me, right? But toxic stress is something that should not be there, and it actually does damage. And so pain and suffering happens, we experience toxic stress, and the degree and the severity to which we react and respond to the toxic stress is where trauma is born, it's where it lives, it's where it grows, and the best news, it's also where it dies. Because, and this is people have asked me as I've been getting this degree, what's one nugget that you could communicate to people that they just misunderstand about trauma? And this is it right here. It's that the event is not the trauma. The actual event that occurred is not the trauma. The clinical definition of trauma is it's a person's emotional response to a distressing experience. Okay, so where that's really, really important is think about healthy people in your life that may have a very small thing happen to them, but it's like the worst thing that's ever happened in their life to them, and you're like, get over it. Well, and because guess what? It's their emotional response to something that was sudden and unpredictable, feels beyond your control, and it undermined that person's sense of safety in the world, or made them feel like catastrophe could strike at any time. So here's the part that if we could understand as just human beings in general, that 16-year-old kid from a Christian school who got his heart broken by another 16-year-old girl is just as traumatized as maybe a kid who's been growing up in a war-ridden place for his entire life, because it's all about how you respond to the toxic stress. Okay, so trauma is not the event, it's the emotional response to the event. Now, all that to say, there's events that happen in our life that will lead to more trauma than others, right? So there's types of traumatic events that will lead to trauma. You've got your physical, seriously bodily harm or injury, right? And there are certain trauma effects or symptoms that will be felt no matter what. Because if you get an amputation, you're going to get affected. But this also includes sexual abuse, assault, and emotional trauma is kind of separate from physical. This is strictly just the like you got hit, you got in a car crash, you got a broken bone. But then we also have emotional trauma, which is the mental response to a disturbing event, right? We've got acute. So for instance, and you'll hear, I'm an open book, you'll hear a lot about my life. My dad was murdered when I was 18, and that was acute trauma. Like, all right, this just happened, and I gotta respond to it in the immediate. Chronic. My mom right now has battled her entire life with alcoholism. She's right now in a 13-month rehab facility, and so she's experienced a lot of chronic trauma. For me, it's been traumatic just because I want my mom to be healthy, but it hasn't happened. There's complex trauma, which is what I like to call the summer of 2020. COVID, George Floyd, and the election. All of them seem disconnected somehow, yet they all seem connected, and we all lost our collective minds together. It's just a lot of random events that don't seem to be related, but yet it has an effect on us. And then there's spiritual, relational, intellectual traumas are included in this. I'll get to that. That's why I say we're a SPIRE person. But then there's secondary, vicarious, and repeated exposure. That's kind of like pastors, first responders, people that have to deal with just really depressing and unfortunate circumstances in their life regularly. But some alternate definitions, just because I think it's helpful for us to really understand, again, what it is. Elizabeth Elliot is a woman whose husband and her family decided to become missionaries in this third world island that was unreached. First day they got there, they killed the husband, Jim Elliot. And the family decided, we're going to stick it through. And they actually ended up having a very successful mission, a successful ministry there, and his wife Elizabeth, wrote extensive literature on what suffering is as a whole, and what she kind of defined suffering is, or trauma, is it's having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have. Depression, anxiety, I don't want that. Stability, peace, I don't have that, I want it. And a constant having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have is constantly putting us in a place of suffering, or at the very least where trauma can strike. This is just the source, so don't worry about it, and I want to define these terms. Differing levels and degrees of toxic challenges, so that toxic stress, to your assumptive world. What I mean by that is it shouldn't be this way. It's not, my dad shouldn't be hitting me. That's my assumption in the world is I should be safe and loved and accepted by my dad, not the other way around. And any sort of challenge to our assumptive world can take place in any sphere that we're living in. And then the last one is it's a poisonous contamination of one's ecological system. A lot of big words, but that's why I wanted to show you this. Every single individual, right, is an individual, yes. But this individual then has a microsystem right around them, and that consists of their family, their doctor, their workplace, their religion, and then outside of that is the interactions and things in the microsystem that can be speaking to them, but it's not affecting them totally every single day. Things like media, politics, and then there's just all of these things that are going around that are affecting us. And if I were to take this water and put it into Sandra's Coke, there's Coke? Yeah. Diet Coke. It would not then be water and Coke. It would be something that is completely different, because I've inserted something into that system that has changed the makeup of it. And so that can happen a lot, right? Especially with traumatized people. You throw something into someone's system that was never meant to be there, you're not going back to normal. You're starting from scratch with a completely new deck of cards. But this is what I say, is that if you can answer any of these following questions, right? You can kind of read them. If you can answer any of them, well then congratulations, you might have trauma. And most people I know in my life can answer one of these questions confidently and quickly, right? Especially what's out of your control that threatens you. What's a moment that made you feel unsafe? I mean, those are things that we feel every day to a degree. But again, the degree to which we respond is what actually consists of or makes trauma severe or not even existent. All right, buckle up. So this is the important part right here. For any of you that have trauma in your life, I want to tell you right now, this will be an interesting experience, and I say it from personal experience, because if you have trauma in your life, and if you're part of the 4+ ACEs Club like myself, it's going to freak you out. There's good news. There's really, really good news at the end of it, and I would venture to say one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to freak out, or you're going to feel heard and understood maybe for the first time in your life and realize, oh, it's actually not only me. I'm not the only problem here. Okay, so adverse childhood experiences. Talk with you about positive, neutral, and toxic stress. Adverse childhood experiences is concerned with toxic stress. Okay, so how do we get them? What are they? Well, in 1996, 1999, a health insurance company, Kaiser Permanente, commissioned this study out of San Diego. There were over 17,000 participants in this study, and the study was designed to determine the long-term effects of childhood trauma, specifically from ages 0 to 18. And what they wanted to know is there a connection between traumatic events in childhood and adverse negative long-term health effects? What I mean by that in short terms is basically saying they wanted to know, they measured this by comparing leading risk factors in early death, right? Diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, all these things. And then they measured it against how many adverse childhood experiences someone had in their life and how often it occurred. And they were able to kind of come to a conclusion. But basically what they were trying to ask is, we know it's killing people, right? We know it's killing them. Is this something that's contributing to that? Does toxic stress experienced in childhood contribute to poor health and early death? And the answer was overwhelming. This was a direct quote. There's a strong graded relationship between breadth of exposure to abuse or household dysfunction during childhood and multiple risk factors for several of the leading causes of death. In fact, they even went so far as to say the study identified ACEs as one of many basic causes of morbidity and mortality in adult life. So, they found a correlation between an individual who's experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences and the higher probability compared to someone who's only had 0 to 3. If you have 4 or more, it's more likely that you're less physically healthy, you're less mentally healthy, you're less socially stable, and you can expect to die 20 years earlier than the average person. Across the board. So what are they, and how do they affect us? And I want to start by saying I'm 10 for 10 on this list. I had all 10 growing up. Okay? So know that you're in good company. Well, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. So here's the 10 events that can happen between 0 to 18. I would encourage you don't have to share, but I would encourage you to take inventory of how many maybe you've experienced. Or if you haven't experienced more than 4, think about people in your life who have. Okay? Emotional abuse. Parents swore at you, put you down, acted in a way that made you feel like you might be physically hurt, that you weren't loved, accepted, or worth anything in your home. Physical abuse of any kind, parent who or adult who exerts any real type of physical violence onto a child. That's a no bueno. You've got sexual abuse. And here's where this is really important. This is any sexual desire thrust onto a child before it's appropriate for them to process it. So I would want you to take a second and think about the implications of pornography in our world with that. That's not something a kid is ready to see, ready to process or enter into. But any type of sexual desire thrust onto a child can be considered, at least for this study, sexual abuse. Mother treated violently in the home. Substance abuse in the home. Alcoholic, street drugs, intravenous, whatever one it is. Mental illness in the home. And again, I just want to stop for a second and think and have you consider, how does a child process through bipolar at 7, 8? How does a kid process through PTSD? How does a kid process through generalized anxiety? Especially as they start to grow up and learn some things about the world and themselves, such a hard thing for them to be able to look at the person who's supposed to care and love for them and see them as weak, or at least that definition of who they are supposed to be strong. And it sets the stage for kids at a later age that it's hard for them to even recognize that there's a mental illness that's taking over their life. Parental separation or divorce, incarcerated family member, emotional neglect. I know it's kind of like emotional abuse, but it's really just lack of love and support, right? Latchkey kid, just parents were never around. And then there's physical neglect, which is basically a lack of basic needs or parental incompetence. Didn't know where your next meal was coming from, didn't know, I talked about in my story, I legitimately had a staph infection all over my face. They actually thought I might have had hepatitis B, and my mom thought I was just picking zits too much. And so there's that physical neglect. So if a need was not taken care of that caused pain and suffering, that's an adverse childhood experience. So now if you flip it over, but don't look at the bottom. Now if you flip it over, that's what this is, right? This is just a helpful little infographic. These are the 10 things that can happen in a child's life that affects them negatively over the long haul. So remember, that study was done in 1999, and the most humbling part of that study, in my opinion, was that they actually said we may not have gone far enough. Like we may not even we think we know what the damage is, but it might be worse than we could have possibly imagined. This was back in 1999. And so ever since then, they've evolved, and the Philadelphia ACE project specifically has included things like, basically they use that ecological systems theory and say like, hey, there's a lot of other things that contribute to whether or not a kid has an adverse childhood experience, right? If you're living in a place where there's a lot of community violence, where there's a lot of racism, bullying, injustice, it's really hard to, having emotional abuse is one thing, having emotional abuse in the context of maybe 3 or 4 other things kind of compounds the issue. They've been, adapted, used, these are the 10. The 10 original ones, and the prevalence of them, you can see that here. This is just the number I'm concerned with. This number is skyrocketed since. Absolutely skyrocketed. There's no possible way it's still 4. In fact, I think the basic research right now says it might be 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 who've had 4 or more. It could be worse than that. So, but what are the consequences? This is where it might freak you out a little bit, but don't worry. Everything's all right.
Over half of us have a chronic disorder such as high blood pressure or autoimmune disease. Rates of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction are skyrocketing. Why? The roots of these issues and more can often be traced to trauma, adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, and ultimately, nervous system dysregulation. Meet your autonomic nervous system. Let's call it ANS. ANS takes care of a lot of your automatic functions, like your heartbeat, digestion, and body temperature. ANS also manages your survival and stress response, working to keep you alive when your life is in danger. ANS functions as our built-in detection system, constantly scanning our environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. As ANS scans the environment, it has 3 general responses or states. Safe. You feel calm, relaxed, and connected to those around you. Mobilized. When ANS detects danger, it sends a command and your heart rate and breathing increase, adrenaline and cortisol are released, and blood rushes to your muscles so you can handle the threat. This is our fight-flight response. Immobilized. When ANS detects that the danger is so great that you can't fight or run, it shuts you down. In this state, our heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature decrease, and pain-numbing endorphins are released. ANS does all of this automatically without us thinking about it. ANS doesn't just use these states for survival. It uses them to navigate through the world each day. When ANS functions well, it moves fluidly from one state to another, 1 minute mobilized and ready for action, and the next resting and recovering. ANS will often blend states together. When we play, ANS combines the mobilized and safe states. And when we are intimate with loved ones, it combines immobilized and safe states. When ANS can stay flexible and fluid like this, it helps us manage and become resilient to stress and negative events. We're able to bounce back and move on. Unfortunately, when we experience trauma and chronic stress, it can keep ants from functioning in a healthy, regulated, and resilient way, and can keep us stuck in states of survival. A friendly get-together can become frightening. A simple meeting at work can become threatening. For those with a history of trauma and chronic stress, the ants detection system often becomes faulty, constantly signaling danger even when we are safe. It's like ants as an alarm system, constantly signaling fire even when there's no smoke and no flames. Consistently living in these survival states can be debilitating, and we often develop adaptive strategies like using drugs, alcohol, food, work, or sex in an attempt to bring regulation and temporary relief. Understanding how trauma impacts us is critically important. There is a whole spectrum of experiences that can be traumatizing and adversely impact ants, like accidents, assaults, and natural disasters, which are often called shock traumas. There is also developmental or relational trauma, when we experience chronic adversity, abuse, neglect, and lack of safety while growing up. Many other experiences can be traumatizing, including chronic stress, medical procedures, and adverse community environments like poverty, discrimination, and violence. Additionally, new research in epigenetics shows us that trauma can get passed down genetically at least 3 generations. In the past, we've thought about trauma as events that happen to us. We now know that trauma is an experience, not an event. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. It's our response to the event rather than the event itself. Over 20 years ago, Kaiser and the CDC launched a groundbreaking study of over 17,000 patients that showed a direct link between adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and long-term health and wellness. In the study, 2/3 of participants reported at least one ACE. Over 20% reported 3 or more. When participants reported 4 or more ACEs, this corresponded to an increased chance for heart disease, cancer, drug abuse, and more. With 6 or more ACEs, life expectancy decreases by almost 20 years. We are learning that many physical and emotional symptoms may emerge from a chronically dysregulated ANS. When ANS gets stuck in survival states, our biology shifts its focus from the tasks that keep us healthy, happy, and thriving to surviving the immediate perceived threat. Many conditions and symptoms that are chronic and difficult to diagnose and treat can be attributed to a dysfunctional ANS. Our childhood experiences can also keep us from connecting with others. This is vitally important because as children, our #1 survival priority is to attach to caregivers. When the people responsible for our safety aren't safe, and we are living in chronic states of unsafety, ANS doesn't get wired right. The part of ANS that judges what is safe and what is not becomes faulty. If intimacy and connection were unsafe as a child, as adults, we'll often unconsciously reject attempts from friends and partners to connect. Even though intimacy and connection is what we want, ANS feels it's unsafe and won't allow it. Trauma compromises our ability to engage with others, replacing the need for connection with the need for protection. When there has been trauma, ANS can no longer differentiate between our unsafe past and our now safe present. ANS can't turn off the need to protect, even though we are now safe.
A quote that is now sticking up on my board said, "Learn to let go of the survival skills." And I think that victims of trauma have to understand that's basically what it is. It's survival skills. And what he just described with the ANS thing, the autonomic nervous system, it's the reason sometimes we suffer more than we need to is because we don't allow ourselves to ever leave survival mode, constantly in fight or flight. And so the consequences is literally an altered brain structure. And this is the part where it affects the most. And so 2 things I want to draw your attention to. Right brain, left brain. All right? Is there actually a marker over there? Okay, I thought I saw a green one.
There's expo, like.
Awesome, yeah.
markers.
Okay, cool. Oh boy. Luckily that was just water. And I know Sue and Kayla and all of them, so whatever. All right. Anyone here a fan of the show, or anyone here Marvel fans? Dang it, I'm 33, so. All right, so you got your right brain, and your left brain. All right? There's something called, let me use a different color. There's something called an amygdala that basically makes sure that these two connect all the time. Anyone know what right brain does?
Analytical.
No. Other one.
Artistic.
Creative,
Oh, kind of opposite.
info. No, you're good. Creative, info, storage, and processing.
That's your right brain?
Yep, your right brain takes something in, it takes all the information, stores it, and then finds a creative way to process it. Left brain uses the tool, and it's important when you think about it that way, of language to systematically and logically communicate what the right brain has processed. What trauma does in the lives of the individual is they've shown by brain scans, the more trauma, the more ACEs you have, about 20 to 25% bigger than the average human, the right brain. Left brain is about 20 to 25% lower. And so there's this part, and there's a show in Marvel where it's like this loom, right? And so what they're trying to do, the main villain, is he's trying to take all of these different realities and all these different universes and shove them into just one little hole where it all coalesces into one thought. And that's exactly what's happening in the brain of a traumatized person, because they actually have greater capacity for information storage, for creative processing, for being able to actually think through things, but unfortunately, their ability to use the tool of language to communicate it. So if you know a severely traumatized person, those people are usually the most difficult people to communicate with, because they're all over the place. And I know that because I've been the one that's been all over the place all the time. And so what ends up happening is that amygdala, that green line, over time, it just says, I'm not doing this anymore. And it shuts down completely. And your right brain and left brain don't know how to communicate as well as they should. Same thing happens, she kind of talked about it with the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Best way to understand it, sympathetic nervous system. Alert, something's going on, I'm in danger. But what that actually does is when that part of your body activates, there's a lot of physical things taking place. The biggest thing is your heart rate elevates. Adrenaline gets dumped into the system. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, that activates to calm you down. And that only calms down when the trauma stops. But over time, what happens is the alert stage, it anticipates that trauma will come even if it's not going to. And so it gets worked up prematurely. And then in times when you're supposed to be active, your brain's been trying to keep you so active to respond to an alert that you crash at work completely, or you crash in the important parts of your life, because all of a sudden, all that cortisol has just been dumped into your brain, which is related to stress, and so your entire internal clock just says, we're not doing this anymore, and that same connective lens, or that same connective cord in your brain that connects the right and the left brain, how it severs over time, same thing happens with the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. It just says, we're not doing this anymore. And so then you get to a spot where you can't ever get to a point until you actually allow yourself to heal a little bit to ever emotionally regulate properly. So it does a huge, huge toll. Impulsivity and risk control centers are the ones that are damaged the most. I've already kind of talked about this, less physically healthy, overall less high blood pressure, weakened heart, diabetes. And yeah, I don't know if you caught that. There's a lot of new promising research that's coming out that literally says what trauma does, toxic enough stress, it affects the genes at a cellular level. And they found that people can experience trauma prenatally. Yeah, so this is something that, she talked about it, 3 generations. So if you ever wondered why can't this curse escape my family, that's probably a good reason, because it is quite literally coded into the genes of this person. Less mentally healthy, right? Higher rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, suicidal ideation and attempts. Less socially stable, antisocial disorders, very common. Risky social behaviors, early pregnancy, 50 or more sexual partners is common. Poor work performance, domestic abuse and violence, whether you're the perpetrator or the victim. And then life expectancy, again, decreases by 20 years. Let's get back to Johnny. Johnny got lost in the solution cycle. Today's solution became tomorrow's problem. Johnny experienced 4+ ACEs, leading to childhood anxiety, anger, or depression. They've done studies and they have found it's not the traumatic event that happens in childhood that automatically assumes you'll have poor mental health as an adult. But what happens is when you have 4 or more ACEs, you start having anxiety and depression in childhood. And that starts this path of having more life stressor events, of leading to riskier behaviors, riskier actions, right? And so Johnny experienced these and he had anger, anxiety, and depression suffered in his childhood. Johnny's brain, that's why this is important, tried to protect itself. And in doing so, it altered its very structure to protect itself from the environment that it was around. Quite literally altered. It's not just a theory. His brain changed its shape. Johnny's brain found a solution in things like smoking alcohol and in drug abuse, overeating, and promiscuous sexual behavior. But here's the problem. This is where we really need to have a lot of understanding, sympathy, and grace for people that are going through these situations. The solution helped. And that's the part that's so tricky, is because let's take nicotine for example. Nicotine actually does have a positive. It helps you emotionally regulate. So if you go, what does alcohol do? It helps numb. It helps anxiety, overeating. We need it to survive. There's plenty of benefits in a healthy, sexually intimate relationship. These are good things that we're trying to reach for, and no wonder the brain wants to reach for them because they need a solution in the moment. Problem becomes, does Johnny continue to experience this toxic stress and more ACEs without an ability to escape, right? His brain learned to keep reaching for these. I just gotta keep reaching for it, because it will make him feel better. That's the part that we genuinely need to understand. It will biologically, physiologically make him feel better in the moment. The solution is to feel better today in order to survive until tomorrow. But what's helping me feel better today is gonna harm me physically tomorrow, which is gonna make me feel bad. Not gonna feel good about it. And then the cycle will continue and continue and continue and continue. And what normal, right, I always put those in quotes, what normal, healthy people would consider a problem, substance abuse, dependence, overeating, risky sexual behavior, it actually provides the user with 4 or more ACEs a legitimate, usable solution to ease the pain, calm the body, and emotionally regulate. And those aren't bad things, those aren't bad goals. But today's solution becomes a major contributor, or it becomes the cause, the actual cause for the problem that leads to early death tomorrow. Right? So let's rethink our feelings about Johnny for just a second, and this is where I want to have just a couple moments. Knowing what we know about what we just talked about, can we understand why Johnny's a difficult and confusing person? Is his behavior more understandable? And then again, I want to take some time to kind of maybe group think this. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. I would love to, and remember, there's good news on the other side of this. Genuinely good news. And I can tell you right now, I heard this, so a lot of what I just presented to you, I became a Christian when I was 16 years old, and I heard about adverse childhood experiences the day after my 32nd birthday. So it means I heard about this a day after I'd been a Christian than I hadn't. Like, I'd been a Christian for one day longer in my life than I hadn't, and I realized that all of this stuff, all the pain in my life, so much of it was stemming from this, and the resiliency factors are the people in my life that stepped in when I was 16 and just never let me go. So there is good news. The brain wants to heal. Okay, the brain wants to heal, and this is the best news. It's surprisingly good at healing itself. It is phenomenal. So as quickly as it can get damaged, it can get healed. But you need to give the brain the space and the time to allow it to do the work of healing. This is taking forever now, so that's where I want to try out. Yeah, you need to allow it to, I'm just going to go ahead and move forward a couple. But if you give it the space and time to do the work of healing, the brain will go to work and start healing itself.
So what can we do when ANS becomes dysregulated? How do we recover from trauma and develop a healthy, regulated, resilient nervous system? Fortunately, we can retrain ANS to feel safe again. This is best done with the help of others. Each one of us has an ANS, and our ANS is constantly communicating with and attuning to the states of others. We autonomically mirror the states of those around us. This is called co-regulating. We see it in herd behavior. If one animal senses danger, the entire group becomes more alert, increasing their chances of survival. We're exactly the same. When we're with others who are stressed, angry, or depressed, it makes us feel worse. When we're with others who are calm and happy, it makes us feel better. Connecting with others who are safe, attuned, and present is the best way to restore a healthy ANS. For those struggling to recover from the impacts of trauma, there is an emerging field of innovative clinical therapies that have been developed to reestablish safety and regulation to ANS. We're also learning that many of the activities we intuitively know make us feel better, like spending time in nature, practicing yoga, dancing, helping others, and more, can help ANS become more regulated and resilient. Healing from trauma and finding release from being stuck living in survival states comes as ANS becomes regulated, increases its capacity for resilience, and regains its flexibility. It's not about being calm all the time or mobilized all the time. It's about having a flexible and resilient nervous system that can accurately assess safety and danger and responds appropriately. We're truly resilient when we can fluidly move from one state to another. For those living with the impacts of trauma and chronic stress, becoming unstuck is like beginning a new life. For the rest of us, understanding how our nervous system states guide our behavior can help us become happier, healthier, and more empathetic human beings. Collectively, we have an epidemic of social issues that are rooted in trauma. If we can do the work to heal past traumas and build healthy, regulated nervous systems as individuals, families, and communities, we can end the cycles that continue to reinforce our greatest challenges and create a safer, vibrant, and more connected world.
Proven factors to increase resilience and grow from trauma. And you'll understand why in just a minute. I don't want to stay stuck in the word resilience because I don't think it does us the service that we need. So yeah, healthy relationships with adults, that's a big thing. What we need to realize is ACEs are just a tool to help us identify who needs more care. Right? It's not a death sentence. Brain is plastic, which means it's moldable, it wants to heal. If toxic stress stops, the brain will heal. New habits form new brain chemistry. Mindfulness practices, adequate sleep, whatever it is spiritually that you're into, having some discipline in those areas genuinely helps. But the primary and the most successful, so I don't know if this is going to make you feel better or worse, but there's more than one, so I promise. The primary and most reliable method to grow out of trauma, this is taking forever, man. You know what? Oh, here we go. Is a healthy, stable family, home life, and environment. Easy enough, right? No, it's not. It's actually very difficult. But what are 5 factors that help promote this goal? I'm just gonna get to all 5, so because this is getting a little unresponsive. 5 factors that help promote this goal: good health, adequate nutrition, security and safety, responsive caregiving, and opportunities for early and ongoing learning. I did not make these up teaching this class here for the first time, but tell me that's not exactly what Streams is all about, is providing all 5 of those things. Genuinely, and the right healthy neighborhood hub, like that's what Streams basically exists to do, is to help you with these things, to help grow from this. That's why I'm just can see I'm getting goosebumps. That's why I was so excited that this is the first time I get to share this stuff with a group of people, because this is the best place to be involved. And they really can, because I mean, think about this. Ken and Carrie, you can hop on, but I mean, yeah, good health, in terms of classes that are taught here, what we're doing right now, adequate nutrition, one of the best food banks I've ever seen in my life in terms of quality of food.
And Meals and Wheels site.
Yeah, the Meals on Wheels, that's great.
Exactly, that security and safety, I mean, you can't get through this door without, someone letting you in. Responsive caregiving, again, that's teaching, parent classes, helping you guys understand this as you go home with your kids.
Catherine's.
Yeah, exactly. Bingo. And then opportunities. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Swag, like
Swag.
Tutoring.
Tutoring.
basically streams could be understood as like a ACEs recovery center for people that need it. Okay, but then here's the other things that promote it. And some of these are a little bit repeated, but a strong family nature. Ability to find other sources of help and support will show up in a second. An important person outside of the family circle, being well liked by friends and peers, that does help when you're not actually the problem in the room all the time, and that's where healthy people can help a little bit. Ability to make school or sanctuary, or a school sanctuary, or home away from a chaotic family situation, that's a really, really important one. Talk to any traumatized kid. I remember the moments that I first started to experience growth from my traumatic childhood was moments that I was taken out of my home for an extended period of time. Going to live with my uncle for a month, or staying at school until 5, 6 p.m. because the teacher let me, and her talking to me. It created a sanctuary, a safe place for me, if you will. Participation in extracurriculars, and then help from a church youth group. This is what they said. This was what Kaiser Permanente said, not Eric's opinion, but said these things do help because you are a Spire person, and spiritually, even if you're not there, that's a part of your well-being. And so, hey, Hillside or I would love to help if this is something you want to try. Genuinely, I can talk about this for 4 hours. Like, this is my most passionate subject of my life, and so I will gladly, anyone that wants to chat or need help, this is, and I genuinely say this, I have not felt this way in a very long time. This is what God put me on earth to do, is to talk to people about trauma and help them grow from it. So. Second intervention method, right? And it's just as important, because maybe you're like, yeah, that all sounds great. That's not happening tomorrow. That's not happening next week. It's not happening in a month, right? Second intervention method is twofold. Increasing our awareness of the occurrence, I'm gonna wait till it pops up. Increasing our awareness of the occurrence and prevalence of ACEs in your childhood and the lives of those who are living in your home and people you regularly do life with. So especially like your own kids, if you know they've experienced some of these things, an increase in awareness of this is what these things are and this is what they do, that's the first part, but then the second is even more important. You need to increase your awareness of your emotional response to toxic stress and ACEs, whether it was your own or whether it's ones that are happening right now. Because if you can be aware of those two things, then one of my favorite pieces of advice in the entire world, and that's these two things, is what we did tonight. So you're asking, even being equipped with this information is helpful, because what it ultimately puts us in a place a perspective is what I like to call, and it'll show up here in a second, do as you will, just know why you do. You're allowed to do whatever you want. You're allowed to make the decisions and emotionally respond and regulate however way that you feel that you need to survive, but increased awareness of the occurrence, the prevalence, and the reaction that we have to toxic stress from pain and suffering. If we can actually have increased awareness of those things, it increases the likelihood of growing out of trauma or avoiding it altogether. And I truly mean that moving forward. You have a similar situation pop up, you can be aware of these two things, it increases the likelihood that you don't even have to experience trauma from something you would otherwise experience trauma from. You will experience the pain and suffering, don't get me wrong. That's coming no matter what. But you don't need to have a traumatic response to it. You can have a healthy response to it. So this is what we're going to talk about next week. Growing begins, growing begins with knowing. I'm just going to go through all 5 of these. That's going to be our topic next week, and it's specifically on the topic of post-traumatic growth. And if I did not believe that that was a real thing, then I wouldn't be here tonight. Post-traumatic growth is an actual clinical term that has basis in scientific studies, academic peer-reviewed journals. It is a real thing. Brain wants to heal, you just have to let it. We're not aiming for hardiness, for resilience, optimism, or just a sense of coherence or well-being. What do I mean by that? Hardiness. All four of those things take pain and suffering and trauma and try to deny it, to get it out of the way, right? Hardiness. I'm just gonna push through and nothing's gonna affect me. I don't care how bad it's gonna hurt someone else. I'm hard enough to where it won't hurt me. Resiliency. I will persevere through whatever hardship. I'm not gonna let it affect me. I'm not gonna let it define me. I'm certainly not gonna let it take me down. Optimism is I'm just gonna choose to be happy and ignore the pain and suffering. And then the sense of coherence and well-being is sort of like this stoic, all is well, nothing new under the sun, who cares? No. We want post-traumatic growth, because what post-traumatic growth does is it takes that trauma and it puts it right in the center and says, this is the fuel. This is the thing that actually motivates me to want to grow, because that's the area, rather than ignoring it and saying, no, I'm gonna put this right in the driver's seat, and this is gonna be the very thing that actually motivates and fuels me to change my behavior and change just some of the negative stressors in my life. And so we're gonna talk about what are the things, the factors, and the tools that promote post-traumatic growth. I can tell you right now, it will probably be the most informational one in terms of but if you're a parent, I'm gonna give you some cheat codes next week to just be like, hey, because really trauma is a script, but so is adolescent development, right? Identity development, moral development, and all these different physical, mental development. Your 12 to 14-year-old and your 7 to 8-year-old are two fundamentally different humans, and the good news is you can understand what makes them different and how to respond to them at a certain age. I think that's it.